Louisville now the latest city to be crippled by a string of heroin overdoses. At one point, 52 cases in just 32 hours.
Louisville, Kentucky is the latest city to experience a spike in heroin overdoses. In January alone, Metro Emergency Services answered 695 overdose calls.
Moms, dads, sons, and daughters are all affected. The rich, the poor, the middle class.
It's a very good day in the emergency department if I don't see a heroin overdose. I haven't had one of those days in a long time.
We are staying on the story of the heroin crisis in America. As you just heard, no one is immune to opioid addiction. In fact, the CDC reports in 2015, 33,000 people died from prescription opioid and heroin overdose. If we break that down, it's 91 Americans killed each and every day. On the front lines battling this epidemic, Dr. Robert Couch is an ER doctor at Norton Audubon Hospital in Louisville, and also Howard Samuels, a former heroin addict who now runs the Hills Treatment Center. Good to have both of you with us. Doctor, I want to start with you. We just heard you say, it's a good day if we don't have an overdose in the ER, but you haven't had one of those in a while. I know today, within 10 minutes of starting your shift at 7 a.m. this morning, there was already an overdose that came into the ER, as I understand it. Who are the people in Louisville who are overdosing?
We see all ages who are involved in this terrible epidemic. Many times the focus is on younger patients, but we see folks of all ages. My oldest heroin overdose that I saw was in their late 60s. So it really affects, as you mentioned, all walks of life, all ages.
We know oftentimes, too, it begins, not always, but oftentimes can begin with prescription painkillers and opioids. Howard, how quickly can that turn into a heroin addiction, and why does it move to heroin?
Well, it moves to heroin because, you have to do a lot of doctor shopping in order to get the prescription opiates. And then if you buy the prescription opiates on the street, the pills are, $30 to $50 a pill. So you're going to find the availability of the heroin these days is all over the place, and it's cheap. So that's why there's been a huge epidemic with heroin these days on the streets, because there's so much of it.
There's so much of it, and it's, from what I understand, it is, the dosage is higher, and Howard, correct me if I'm wrong, but each time there is a dose, or rather a batch of heroin that leads to a number of deaths, people actually seek it out. Howard, why?
Well, when I was shooting heroin in New York City, and whenever a certain brand of heroin, there were overdoses around that brand of heroin, we wanted it, because that said it was extremely strong and good. Now, that may sound crazy, but it's actually not crazy to the addict, because we want the best heroin out on the street. So it's like a marketing call. If you get ODs off a brand of heroin, you want it badly.
It's just amazing to try to wrap your head around that. Dr. Couch, when we do talk about the involvement of prescription drugs, I know according to the CDC, since 1999, the number of prescription pills sold has quadrupled, and at the same time, the deaths involving opioids have also quadrupled. You see this every single day. You see the potential impact for numbers like these. A, are prescription opioids the problem? And B, if they are and we know it, 20 years in nearly, how are we here?
Prescription opioids are part of the problem, but it isn't just that being the single factor as to how we got here today. We recognize that physicians need to be careful in their prescribing patterns so we can limit the amount of opioids that patients are getting.
So, doctor, what is the messaging that perhaps we are missing as a country?
We need a better understanding of how addiction works. We understand that, addiction is not a personality problem. It's a disease, and we need to treat it as such.
And Howard, real quickly, how difficult is it for someone to kick this type of addiction?
Very difficult. I mean, I started shooting heroin at 16, and I'm a convicted felon because of it, but also I went through treatment centers about 3 years of my life before I finally got sober, and now I have 32 years clean and sober. But you know, the problem is the insurance companies aren't giving the treatment centers enough time to really deal with the individual who's a heroin addict. I mean, I might get 2 or 3 weeks with a heroin addict in a treatment center before they're sent to an IOP, an outpatient program. I mean, the insurance companies don't understand the problem, and that's a huge part of what we're dealing with as far as treatment centers. We don't have enough time with the individual.
Howard Samuels, Dr. Robert Couch, appreciate you both being with us and appreciate what you do every day to help so many people. Thank you.
You're welcome.